Hello, I will be discussing host risk factors and environmental factors for suicide among males in Montana from 2012 to 2014. Some host risk factors include gender, age, race, sexual orientation, and marital status. To begin with, gender. According to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, data and statistics report that males die by suicide 3.53 times more often than women, and it is considered the seventh leading cause of death for males. For example, based on the research conducted and collected by Harris, Houghton, and Zale, state that men reported significantly higher levels of suicide intent than women based on their impulsiveness. The next factor is age. Based on the statistical demographic of suicide rate in 2014 to 2015, it states that adult men ages 35 to 44 years were prevalent to suicide, and second highest were middle-aged men. In 2014, the suicide rate for middle-aged men in Montana was 54.4 per 100,000. Based on the research collected, it was noted that whites and American Indians, Alaska Native go hand in hand in having high rates in comparisons to other race and ethnicity groups when it comes to suicide. When it comes to sexual orientation, gay and bisexual men are prevalent to suicide. According to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, gay and bisexual men are more likely to commit suicide and have a higher chance in succeeding than heterosexual men. In this case, Tavernier state that factors like not having social, emotional, and physical safe and support from family and friends can result to committing suicide. Lastly, another factor that contributes to suicide vulnerability among males is marital status. Individuals that are divorced or widowed can result in having suicidal thoughts. Due to having lost a loved one, the individual can feel abandonment, which can affect their mentality. In an article by Sabrina Tavernier states that single males have a high risk of vulnerability, which leads to isolation, depression, and anxiety resulting in suicide. In this slide, I include an illustration that includes statistical demographics of suicide rate by sex, age, group, and race in Montana from 2014 to 2015. As you can see, one can notice that males were more prevalent to suicide than females. In age, individuals ages 35 to 44 were susceptible to committing suicide. For race, it shows that American Indians had higher rates of suicide during that year. However, whites had higher rates in 2016. Both races go hand in hand for having higher rates in suicide each year. In this slide, I will be talking about the environmental factors of suicide, which include geographic location, environmental events, low socioeconomic status, and occupation. Environmental factors are which the disease may exist and continue to live due to the climate, weather, social environment, and biological components. According to the research conducted by Rebecca Clay, states that rural areas have high suicide rates due to easy access to firearms, drugs, alcohol, and limited access to healthcare providers and emergency medical facilities. Another example is altitude. A research study examined if there were any associations between altitude and suicide. As a matter of fact, they found a positive relationship which confirmed that altitude affected the oxygen levels, creating mood disorder and suicide risk. Another subfactor is environmental events, cause stress-related factors that affect mental health that lead to suicide. An example of an environmental event in Montana that happened in 2015 is floods, which resulted that homes were flooded and numerous people were left homeless. Next factor is low socioeconomic status. Suicide prevalence is higher among those that have low socioeconomic status. Lastly, occupation. According to McIntosh et al., states that farming, fishing, and forestry occupation has the highest rates of suicide among males, which was 84.5 per 100,000. In this slide, I included two demographics. The first one is the death rates per 100,000 population from 2008 to 2014 in the state of Montana among males of all ages, races, and ethnicities. It illustrates that the western side of the state in Montana is prevalent among suicide, specifically rural areas. And the second demographic illustration shows the occupation. In this case, in the state of Montana, business, sales, and professionals were among the highest rate in suicide.